All right, welcome back to another one. Today we've got a few questions, actually from readers and listeners. So we're excited to dive into that. Mitchell, I'll go ahead and throw this one over to you. I really want to hear what you think about this. It's a great question. In essence, it's basically saying, is it better to start if I would say I would add a caveat if you're entrepreneurial or if you see yourself running a business or doing something like that eventually, is it better to start a business when you're younger and have less experience, or is it wiser to wait, try to stack up experiences and do it later? So I guess, yeah, like, is it better to start a business early so you can take on more risk, or is it better to get experiences in like more secure jobs, save a little bit of capital, and so it's a safer bet later on. Like which is a better play?
Yeah, shout out to our audience. Love the questions. Keep them coming. Shoot them to us. Slide into DMs, drop a comment on YouTube, email them to us, playbook at Discover Praxis, or hit up John or I personally. This is a great question to start out, and it's one that I feel like we encounter regularly with students who are entrepreneurial or aspirationally entrepreneurial. So they kind of have that itch, but they know it's a longer time horizon.
Yeah.
Encounter plenty of students who are very, very entrepreneurial, even younger. And they're just like, they're ready to hustle. And the idea of like going and doing a job, maybe it sounds unappetizing, but maybe they just have so much energy and enthusiasm to get started that they just want to do it and figure out. So it's a question we get asked a lot, and one that I think that it's highly contextual and there's no right or wrong answer. There's trade-offs. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And I think it's also personal preference. The right answer, I'll give you kind of the like 10,000 foot view glossed over generic answer as I see it. What do you want? What scares you more? What excites you more right now? What do you feel like you naturally feel led more to right now? And forget all the other stuff. Forget the risk, forget the status games, forget other people's expectations. Just like, which one are you more excited to do right now? I think that is typically a tell earlier in your career. There's this great Derek Sivers quote. I've used this often in content. I've talked about it on the podcast. And, it's like early on in your career. Well, I'm gonna modify it. This is the way I usually use it. His version of it is like, it's either a hell yes or a no. And I think that's a little bit different when you're early in your career. I think early in your career, it's like, say yes to anything that's not a hell no. So like anything that's just absolutely, you know that it's not going to just kill you inside. Say yes to it. Say yes to cool opportunities. And then as you get older, that kind of inverts. Like, you should ruthlessly say no to things unless they really fire you up. But early on in your career, like, say yes to as many cool things as you're excited by. And if starting a business and like doing something now excites you, great. I'd say the other situation is, like, I wouldn't worry too much about it unless you have an actual job offer in hand and you're making this difficult decision between the two. That's where it becomes a little bit more real. And then again, it's a matter of like the trade-offs. So, okay, and I got the generic response out of the way. I want to tell a story first. It's from a great book. I highly recommend it if you have, like 60 hours to devote to reading this book. It's John D. Rockefeller's biography, Titan. And buried in the middle of this, front half of the book, when John D. they're kind of describing the way that he got its start. Most people know Rockefeller as this like billionaire tycoon. Some people maybe have a view of him as an unscrupulous robber baron, if you will. But like, forget all that. Rockefeller came from the sticks, basically penniless. He was very, very driven. And I don't know how true this story is. This is probably whitewashed a little bit on his recollection, but he talks about one of the first things he did when he was like in his early teens. He knew that he wanted to go into business. He knew he wanted to start something and build something. And the way that he went about it is he went to get a job first. And he literally, in the book, he says it, I went about starting my business. Like, I decided I was going to start my business. And one of the first things I did was I was going to go get a job. And so he went door to door to all these different shipping merchants, like all these different merchants. So he went door to door. He knew basic bookkeeping. He was really good at math. And he tried to get a job in like bookkeeping. He wanted to be in the kind of back office, and he knew that that was kind of, a role where he was like most likely to be able to access. And he got rejected over and over and over again until finally somebody gave him an opportunity. He was getting paid like dirt money. But that was a point of leverage for him to eventually, climb the ranks, eventually open his own business a few years later. And then like the rest is history, if you will. Like there's a lot that's, leaving out a lot, but I love that story because it's one of these examples of like, he knew he wanted to start a business. And in his mind, he saw getting a job as the right first step in increasing his leverage. And when I think about the idea of business, careers, entrepreneurship, kind of a few different categories of leverage. Like one, you need experience. Two, arguably you need capital or access to capital. It's not true across the board. There are businesses that you can start with like low capital, especially as a teen or young adult. They're like lawn businesses, there are service businesses, there are freelance businesses, but you still need skills. And then the last part of that is like you need credibility and skills in order to typically get customers. So capital, experience, credibility, those are kind of like the first things. But I think more important than that, you need to have a problem that you can solve for other people, something that they actually value, and something that a problem other people have that you can solve, that they value enough to pay to have that problem solved for them. That's what you need to find more than anything else. So that may be like mowing their lawn, maybe hanging up Christmas lights for them. It may be, building a marketing website for them. It may be, there are probably problems in the periphery of, most young adults that they could solve without a ton of time, energy, cost to go figure out how to solve those problems. So which brings me to kind of the last point. Is like, okay, if you're really eager early on in your career to start a business, like what business would you actually start today? What business could you start today? Versus kind of the longer view. And so that's where this question takes on a little bit more form when you think about it over a longer time horizon. Is the businesses you would start today probably look different than the businesses that you might start a little bit farther down the line. And that doesn't mean that if you start a business today, you're locked into that for the rest of your career. We've encountered countless young adults who like they started a lawn business or like a photography business or a videography business, and like they eventually transitioned out. We had some who like sold their business and like that gave them a little bit of cash to go do the next thing. Some who just like wound it down. Some who like used the skills they built as a sort of launch pad into better job opportunities. Some that like just kept investing in those skills, and it ultimately morphed into something much, much broader over time. So it really comes down to like what you're trying to accomplish. So the last few caveats here that I'll say about this is, it will somewhat change the types of businesses that you may consider starting. Like, when you don't have a ton of experience, ton of skill, ton of credibility, ton of capital, versus when you have access to more of those things. But like risk tolerance is a real thing. But one of the beautiful things about being younger and not having a ton of experience, context, like you're so naive. And I think that can be a beautiful, underappreciated advantage when you're starting anything new, especially like a business, is if you don't know how hard something is or how hard it's supposed to be, and you don't really have this right barometer of to set the expectation. Like when it is really hard, you don't like, or let me rephrase that. The knowledge the foreknowledge that it's going to be really hard isn't a hurdle that you have to overcome when you don't know anything about anything. But as you get older and you get, you get more seasoned, you gain more life experience, more credibility, more status, and then you have more to lose. So not just in the financial sense, but like maybe you wait until you're, early 30s. You're like, I'm going to, spend my 20s grinding, accumulating capital experience, relationships, skills, credibility, all these kind of things. And then in my 30s, I'm going to go start this business. Well, what happens when, during that time frame, you get married, you have a couple of kids, now you have a mortgage, car payment, you like stack up some of these other things. And even if you haven't like gotten into debt in that sense, like you have all these other obligations. And so it's a totally different calculus in terms of the risk profile. And you now have to like wrap your head around that, because you now, hopefully during that 10-year stretch in your 20s, you gain more context. You're like, okay, I know starting a business is going to be hard. Plus I have all these other balls that I'm juggling that I can't drop. And so that can be something that can be an argument against like waiting, is that, do it now. Even if your business ends up failing when you're younger, the experience that you're going to learn, the value of like going and taking charge, and the way that you can tell that story to land cool opportunities is going to be super valuable. Honestly, that's a great pitch for going and getting a job if it blows up, or even just starting again. But I don't think you can go wrong. I think like, you can do things in your 20s to position yourself so that as you wait until you're a little bit older, and I'm not even saying you have to wait till your 30s, so that you de-risk it. There are ways to de-risk this. Like if you live frugally, you stack up a bunch of cash, you build a ton of awesome relationships, you really dial in on a problem that you care about solving. And you get really good at that. And again, you don't have to start a really capital intensive business when you get older. And you have all these things that you didn't have, the capital, the experience, the skills, credibility, all that. You could still start a low capital intensive business. Maybe you've really spent, you've really gone all in, like building marketing skills or sales skills or something like that. Now you're starting a consulting business where, that's much less risky than going and taking out like a $5 million SBA loan to buy a small business, which, arguments about whether that's super risky or not if it's a business that's already doing well. But it's the risk profile is something that I think people, they look at and they put too much emphasis on the idea of risk. Last thing I'll kind of say here is that in my own personal opinion today, starting a business is not the risky thing. Wanting to start a business and continuing to put that off and not take the leap, that's the risky thing. Like continuing to just like phone it in a typical career and not go do the thing that you really want to do, because every year it's going to get harder. It's going to get harder to like say no to the certainty, predictability, security of steady paycheck. It's going to be harder and harder to take off the handcuffs of sort of this social strata that you're in. Your relationships are going to begin to look like the lifestyle that you're leading over time. So if you're like climbing the corporate ladder, for instance, you're probably going to be surrounded by people that's what they're doing. You're going to be less surrounded by people that are like doing the entrepreneurial thing. And so like over time, the likelihood that you go do the thing is I don't want to necessarily say that it's like it's lower probability, but you're setting yourself up to make that more difficult to make that leap over time. And that again, that's not to say that waiting until your 30s is necessarily bad or whenever, whatever the age is, but the longer you wait, I think the more challenging it can be. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. There are ways to like start, like you can start a side hustle or something while you go get a job as a way to like, de-risk it even more. So anyway, those are some of my starting thoughts. I know that was kind of a lot all at once, but a lot of different ways to tackle it.
I mean, in some ways too, there's one argument might be to that last part of waiting till, let's say I'm going to stack up experiences in my 20s. And then in my 30s, I'm going to start this business. I'm not certain what it is yet, but like I'm going to start it. Well, like in some ways, you almost handcuff yourself. Like if you go a particular route, which is like, I'm going to go find this safe route at a big established company, and I'm going to, like be a great worker there, and build a career there in my 20s. It's kind of like, not necessarily, but in some ways you're handcuffing yourself to whatever it is that company does or whatever you did at that company, whereas somebody who's arguing for the start the business earlier once you have the thing would say is like, well, you kind of can be a little bit of everything at first and learn on the go, and you can, like, you're not going to be like for instance, like, you go on LinkedIn and it's like, oh, and somebody's tagline, ex Google, ex Apple, and it's like their brand is being, and I'm not knocking those people by any means, like that's fine, but their brand is then like being built by, it's just like, this is to see like people do this, like there is built by the past experience, or like, kind of like, this is a negative phrase, but I don't mean it this way, but like, riding on the coattails of Apple or of Google, and
Yeah, it's
using that to build
credential.
your brand. So it's
It's
like,
the same thing as like Harvard grad,
yeah,
Stanford grad. You're just using a credential. And
yeah.
it's
So
a
I think it's like,
shorthand for a signal you're sending. But
yeah. So it's like, that's also, it's often not congruent with a lot of the entrepreneurs I know that end up like doing well, and that's not to say at large, but a lot of the people I've talked to that are in decent spots or excited about the businesses they're building or have built great businesses, like they're not as worried about stacking up those experiences, because a lot of times those experiences, you're not actually, when people go into that, they are more so looking for the security or for the credential, and not the, okay, well, I'm going to go work and learn these skills, and I'm going to take these skills from this business, and that's what's going to help me here. And that's not to say people don't do that, but a lot of times that's what I've seen, which is, I mean, the credential's not really always going to help you with building a business. I mean, like sometimes it does. Like people will be like, oh, this is how I climbed to the top of the leaderboard at Salesforce, and now I have this business, and sometimes it helps. But it's a different approach, which I think is interesting. But then the other aspect of, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, finish up. No,
I
I
was
got
just saying, the
thoughts.
other aspect of this that is interesting is the risk piece. And I'm not I'm not an entrepreneur. I've never started a business, so I think sort of entrepreneurially, but I can't make that claim. But in my experience, like there's always going to be risk to anything you do, and there's always going to be you're always going to trade something. Like you said this, there's always a trade off. So if you start the business when you're young, sure, you're gonna have less. You're not gonna have as much capital, maybe, because you're not gonna be getting a consistent paycheck, or you're not gonna stack up all these like resume pieces. So you're risking that. But if you like you said, if you wanted to do that, or if you were interested in doing that, and then you go and like, oh, I'm gonna get this job. It's 9 to 5. It's consistent. It's a good company. It's kind of like, but now you're risking like this awesome part of your life where you're young, excited, you have energy. You're risking losing that and using that to build this thing you're excited about. So there's always going to be a risk. So I think it really comes down to doing things based on your goals, and then being able to sit down and say, here's the top of the funnel goal, and or not top of the funnel, but here's like the big goal, and then here, when you break it down in segments, like doing things that are aligned to your goals is what's most important here.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I think part of it is also that I think a lot of us have a tendency to hold ourselves hostage to goals we set when we were a former version of ourselves. And I think that's a dangerous thing to do. So this idea of, I want to be an entrepreneur at, let's say 20, I want to be an entrepreneur. I think in the short term, I'm more interested in this cool job opportunity. And so I'm going to go do that because I think it's going to be a great experience. I'm going to learn, build some awesome relationships, maybe save some money. And then you go and do that, and you get really fired up about it. You figure out you're really good at it. You like it. You enjoy it. It's challenging you. You're continuing to grow, and you're on this awesome ramp. But in the back of your mind, you're telling yourself, I used to have this goal that I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And so there's this disconnect between your current reality and this old goal you set, where you're trying to pigeonhole yourself to this goal you set in the past. Even though you're on a cool trajectory, you're excited, and you feel sort of this emptiness of that, like, I need to go work towards this goal. Well, is that still a goal? Is it still something that's valuable?
Yeah.
Do you still care about that trajectory? Why? Is it because you feel like that's sort of the next natural step in your own personal growth trajectory? Do you feel like you can have more impact? Is it about making money? Is it about adventure? Is it about something else? Or is it because you set this goal when you're older, when you were younger, and you feel a little bit beholden to that goal because you set a goal, you told people about that goal, and you feel
Yeah.
like, maybe you're losing credibility by not working on that. I think, again, back up to the 10,000-foot view, like an easy way to think about this, like, don't stress too much about these goals and focus more on, like, am I doing good work? Am I
True.
fired up about what I'm working on? Am I proud of what I'm working on? Do I feel like I'm, making a meaningful contribution to the world? And I don't just mean like, making the world a better place, but like your own personal world.
Yeah.
Like, are you in a cool position where you are increasingly over time able to live out the life that is a reflection of your values? Are
Yeah.
you in an environment where you're surrounded by people that are making you better? Are you continuing to learn and grow and be in a situation where you're challenged to work on problems that demand the very best that is within you?
Yeah.
Like all of those things can be true and you not really know how it plays out. And I think that's the part that freaks most people out, is they feel like there's this kind of deep-seated, you know, psychological need for certainty, I think, about
Yeah.
where we're headed and what it's all adding up to. I think that as much as you can, you got to like fight to keep that monkey off your back and focus on, and I'm not saying like you should only be short-sighted, but at the same time, I think a lot of times people set these goals too far off in the horizon. They hold themselves, basically hostage to this goal that may be totally contrary to sort of the good things that they have going already.
Yeah.
And, I think that could be true as well, if you went the other route. Like maybe you did start a business, everything's going great, but you begin to look at some of your peers who have, they're starting to have corporate success, and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, wouldn't that be nice if I just left all this behind and I went and did this thing? And maybe you're already great. Like the business you've started sort of affords you the life you want, the ability to have the impact and work on problems you care about. Like your life is good, and now you're focused on this other thing. I think it can happen regardless, which regardless which path you take. But I think that at the end of the day, you got to fight that tendency to, always be looking,
Yeah.
like the grass is always greener, and sort of being wondering what if. Like, find something that you're fired up about doing and go all in on that for 12 months at a time.
Yeah.
And if that
Yeah.
ever changes, go find something different. Like it really can be that simple. I'm saying that as much to myself as I am to anybody else.
You said something that made me think of this question. How do you feel about goal sharing? And in a binary sense, are you, and I don't, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you what I think first. I'm going to ask you, are you in the don't tell people your goals camp or tell people your goals camp? If you had to pick one, or be creative with your answer.
Yeah, I don't really have strong feelings about this, but I'll tell you sort of my suspicion. Is why are you doing it? Why do you feel the compulsion to share your goals with other people? What are your motives there? So I think that often people share their goals to get a dopamine hit from the way people respond to their goals. And I would say I was guilty as anybody I am as guilty as anybody about this, especially when I was younger and this sort of prestige status seeker. Like I'd say this really lofty goal because it'd make people think, I'd gain little status points and it'd, make me feel good about myself. I'd say I'm recovering from that, for the past 15, 20 years. Like I've really been, reevaluated that.
Yeah.
I think about it now as a way of like putting skin in the game. So you're placing these little micro bets of social capital, basically by telling somebody, hey, here's something I'm committed to and I'm going to go do it. And I feel this deep seated psychological need to be a person of my word who keeps my word. And so I'm telling goals as a way of forcing my hand to go do the thing that I told people that I was going to do. That's another way to think about it. In general, I think it really doesn't matter too much. Share your goals if you're excited about them. If you could benefit from other people encouraging you, great. If you don't want to share your goals, don't. The last point I'll make is like, there's something really valuable about not telling people your goals and beginning to work towards this thing, and then suddenly reemerging, like 6 months, 12 months after you've been working really hard toward this thing, and then kind of doing, then kind of explaining, hey, here's what I've been doing the past year, and here's what I'm going to do now. And I think that's a good way to curb the tendency to just tell people your goals to get the dopamine hit. Is like, you've actually put in the work, and so now you've made undeniable effort to do the thing that you said you're gonna, you said you're gonna do. So those are some of my initial reactions.
That's sort of like you're just coming with social proof. Like, okay, like I did this. Here's where I want to do next. Like, yeah, that makes sense. I think it kind of goes. I found that it can be similar with like even like telling people about your problems, like or like what you're struggling with.
Yeah,
like it's good to be vulnerable with people. It's especially good to be vulnerable with people you trust. But I think sometimes if you just commit to complete vulnerability, you actually open yourself up to a lot of negative side effects. So let's say, for instance, you told somebody who is like not a super close friend, not more than an acquaintance, but like, like you get together maybe once a year or twice a year. Like you rub elbows at church or something, like somebody who you're nice to, and maybe like you'll have over. Yeah, man, lately I just been really struggling with XYZ, so it can give me a lot of anxiety. And then it's like you're kind of working through that and you get over that. And like the next time you see them, like that's what they ask you about. And like maybe they're being genuine, which is fine, but sometimes it's like you give people this perception of you then too, where like that thing that you're struggling with, they then associate it with you. So now which can be fine, but sometimes it's a drawback because I'm not at all advocating for bottling up. I mean, in some ways I am, but like I'm mostly not. But you need to be thoughtful with why you're sharing your problems, because sometimes it's just you're just ruminating, right? So like if you're just going in circles around it and talking about it, you're not actually trying to make it better. Like if you're going to share it with somebody, there should be a goal in sharing. Again, now like we're talking about goals, but like what I mean is like, okay, I'm sharing this because I feel like this person has something that like maybe I feel led to share it with them. Maybe like they need to hear it, or maybe like they were talking about this at a different time, or they just were speaking about it and they brought it up, and now I'm going to bring it up because maybe they'll be able to give me some advice, and like there's a purpose in sharing it. But I think sometimes if you're just sharing to share all the time, it creates a lot of negative ripple effect that ends up like coming back at different times. So it's sort of similar to the goal sharing. Like it can just be like immediate gratification versus long term.
Yeah, well, they say, as they say, don't ask questions you don't want to know the answers to. I think at the same time, like maybe don't share your goals or your problems if you don't want a certain type of reaction. Like here's a common one that we encounter all the time is like, you'll have a young adult who knows they don't want to go to college, or they're suspect about the idea of going to college. They're beginning to think about not going to college, and they get together at that family get together around the holidays, and somebody's prodding them about this decision, and they're in this sort of vulnerable state, they're in a state of limbo about this thing, and they probably have a little bit of insecurity about it, this decision.
Yeah.
And they haven't 100% made their mind up, and that family member that's like gung-ho prodding them, interrogating them about what they're going to do next year after they graduate high school. And so they tell them, yeah, well, I'm thinking about not going to college. And that person just comes in hard and pops their balloon. It's like, that's a terrible idea. You should definitely go to college. Everybody just, like, again, like this is a made up scenario, but it's really not, because I've encountered that exact scenario hundreds of times of some version of that. I think it's honestly such a common thing that it's like kind of a cultural meme. It's in TV shows, and it's in, like that's a common thing that I think people can relate with. But that's a good example of this idea of don't share. So goals or problems they're temporary milestones that you're working towards. Okay. Mm-hmm. And especially when you're younger and you're trying to like figure out who you want to become or who you are, you have this somewhat amorphous identity. It's fluid and sort of working to figure out who you really are and what you want to be and what skills you want to develop, what you want your life and career. And it's not, a lot of times it's not this really, really fixed thing, and it's fragile. And sometimes when you share this little glimpse of here's who I am right now, but it's not who I'm on the path to becoming, with somebody that, you know, whether they're close to you or not, you get an adverse reaction that maybe causes you to adjust the direction that you want to head, or it shatters your confidence. And then you're like, okay, well, I was thinking about doing this and now I don't feel, maybe I shouldn't. Like that
Yeah.
could be the danger, I think, of sharing, you know, being an overshare when it comes to goals or problems that you're facing with. So anyway,
Yeah. No, that, well, you know, I had a relative who, when I told this relative that I was gonna do Praxis, I wasn't going back to college. This person told me that he said, well, you're gonna end up in that uh motel on the highway and like drinking and this and that, like, and he's kind of like a funny guy anyway, so he was like maybe half kidding. And but the funny thing is that like he didn't go to college, like he's actually, he owns his own business. So like I'm not being super, I don't need to be super cryptic about this. Like I would have this conversation with him. It's not like it's a very lighthearted thing. But it's funny because that also points out like that an older generation, and I've encountered this a couple times, has been bombarded with the same messaging of, yeah, like you got to go to college if you want to like make build a really meaningful career. Meanwhile, like he has an awesome small business. I don't know all his finances and stuff, but like it's a really cool business. And it's like he's got, so somebody like him has like this limiting belief that, oh, well, I didn't go to college, so I'm less. Even though he's got this great small business that like even as it is great. With the right mindset could be probably even better. And so it kind of points out this thing of like, you need to be careful when you're making, because I was thinking about this morning. I live near the local high school, and the teachers have like their meeting going on, like the schools are starting up, and when you're going against what everybody else is doing, what the masses are doing, when you make these decisions because you want to take agency over your life, you do have to be very careful, I think, with who, when, and how you share your plans with people, because you don't want to listen to those voices. Like, it's not like goals and plans, like it's not super binary or just like predestined. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, so this is what's going to happen. Well, like, no, like, honestly, like, if you listen to the wrong voices, like, you will be thrown off track because you'll give place to them. Like, it's not just like, well, this is my plan, this is what's going to happen. You need to protect that. Like this is your plan for a reason. You have your own convictions. You've been hopefully talking with trusted people, family members that you think are going to give you valuable advice, constructive. They want to see what's best for you. They're trying to be holistic friends that are trying to like think through it thoroughly. Like, you want to listen to the right people, people that you trust. But like, you don't need to go around, like, you don't owe it to everybody to tell them your plans, and like, you don't need to convince. This is a big lesson I still learn. You don't need to sell every person you meet on the way that you're living. Like, you don't need to close them if
Absolutely
they don't.
You don't need,
like,
you don't have to justify yourself to anybody.
It's such a trap. It's like I still will sometimes catch myself and be like, wait, like, why am I trying to convince so and so that I haven't seen in 10 years that my philosophy on education is fine? Like, after this conversation, we're probably not going to talk again for maybe another 10 years. So like, why am I going to spend all this energy trying to close them on this? Like, I don't need to. And that's something to take away, is like, when you don't need to close everybody on your plans. You just need to close yourself and any key players that are going to be there a consistent amount of time. Like, they need to be at least supportive, or at best, or at worst, like not an obstacle. Like, that gets me a little bit fired up just thinking about that, because I think so many people get thrown off track.
100%. Yeah. And I think, one way to approach this conversation sometimes is like, at some point, maybe you feel like you owe other people an explanation because you're about to take a diversion from the expected path. And so you've got to at least explain yourself. And again, like, we use the 18-year-old graduating from high school who's, life has been headed this direction and wants to take this detour. And so they got to sit down their parents and explain this. And, good way to start that conversation. Listen, I know you love me. I know you have the best interest at heart for me. But I want to have a serious conversation with you about something that's really been weighing heavy on me. This is something that I've got to go do. I want to go do it. This is the time I have to go do it. And I'm afraid that if I don't go do it now, that I'm never going to have the courage to go do it. And I'm not asking for your blessing or endorsement. If you're willing freely to give that, that's great. But I want to let you know that I've already made up my mind that I'm going to do this. And I want you to know, and I want you to understand that I've thought this through, that I understand the stakes. I am fully responsible for the decision that I'm making. And I'm going to do this with your blessing or not. But I would love to have at least your recognition. And if not your support, then I at least please don't stand in my way. Please don't stop me from doing this thing, because I really want to do this. This is something that I've already made my mind up again. Like something along that line. And if you approach it that way, it's so disarming. But I think a lot of times it's it's either the conversation isn't had, or it's, hey, I'm thinking about this, but I don't have confidence I really want to do it yet. And I throw myself to the wolves before I'm ready to defend this decision I'm contemplating doing. And that's like when you're on shaky ground about a decision you're thinking, that's like the worst time to throw out hypotheticals. Not like it in the context of a marriage, like sometimes it's good to have those hypothetical conversations about like, hey, I've been kicking the tires on this. I always like to, this is my deal too. Like I like to set this up like, listen, this is not a fully formed idea, but I want to just throw a what if out here because I need some help talking through this. There are probably some blind spots I have, and I want to get your initial reaction to this. Maybe it's dead on arrival because it's a dumb idea, and I haven't thought about all the variables. I'm just beginning to think about this, and it's something that I'd like to have an open discussion. That's a different way to approach it as well. That's less confrontational. Maybe a little bit better way to do your due diligence and gauge somebody's reaction. But at the end of the day, don't put yourself in a situation where you're not ready to defend sort of a decision you're hoping to make.
Because you're so vulnerable at that point. Like where it's like what you think is about to be unsolicited advice is not. It's solicited because you just went to them with shakiness and not full confidence. So in their mind, they're hearing, oh, John wants my advice. I'm going to give my advice now. And I'm going to tell him why that would be a terrible idea. And it's like, no. Like, so like, if you're going to go share something that goes against the grain in this context, like the marriage caveat's a good point. Like, I can't go to my wife and be like, yeah, I've already fully decided I'm going to buy this new car. I would like your blessing, but I'm going to do it. Like, that's not a good approach. But
recipe for disaster.
Yeah. In a context like going against the grain, doing something different with your educational future, if you're going to share with somebody who's not like in your immediate circle, like of like close knit, well, I mean, I guess even if you're sharing with your parents and they're not you think they might not be supportive, you should at least take the second approach that Mitchell just outlined, like being like, hey, like it's kind of half baked. I'm not fully certain about this. I'm excited about it. I think it could be really cool, and I just kind of want to think through it together. It's an invite to do it together, as opposed to
discourse. Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, I want you don't necessarily want somebody to make the decision for you, so you shouldn't use language that invites them into a conversation where they feel like, oh, I need to make this decision for John, or I need to do this for Mitchell. Like you want to walk that line carefully.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And the last point I'll make there. So like I used the example of marriage, but it's totally different because, you're on the same team. Your decisions impact more than you. But when you're early in your career, you're like 18 to 22 and you're making decisions about your education, your career, your life in general. Something that I did not appreciate enough at this age. And I think that it needs to be said and reiterated is that you bear the cost for your decisions, whether it's ultimately you, the one who makes those decisions, or it's somebody else that forces you or convinces you to make this decision that's somewhat contrary with the direction that you had. Prime example of this is how many students go to college even though they don't want to, and they don't feel like it's the best use of their time, and they end up taking out student loans to do it because they felt like they were pressured or that was the expectation for them to do it. Countless. Countless. And guess who has to pay those student loans off? In most cases, it's that student.
Yeah.
So don't put yourself in a situation where, you're allowing that advice to steer you in a direction that you don't really want to go. Maybe you make a dumb decision and they're trying to protect you. That's totally fine. Sometimes you need to go make those dumb decisions when you're young anyway, because that's how we learn. So anyway, that's quite a bit for today. I think we're going to have a natural stopping point, and we've got some great content to come back with next time. This is a great conversation. As always, for those out there listening, smash subscribe, hit like, leave us a 5-star review, whatever. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, things that you want us to cover in a future topic, drop them in a comment, shoot us an email, playbook@discoverpraxis. We'd be happy to cover in a future episode. Thanks as always for listening.